So good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are in the world. Talent Finders would like to welcome entrepreneur, founder of Art Compass, a mobile application for IVF practice management, and senior clinical embryologist, Carolyn Kircho. So welcome, Carol.
Thank you.
So Carol, I would like to congratulate you on all your achievements. Can you please share with us how your entrepreneurial journey started? And can you give us some background on your medical specialty for those who don't know?
Sure. I'd love to. Thanks. So, my medical background and specialty is in reproduction.
Yes.
PhD is in the physiology of reproduction. And what I do with that is I basically help people get pregnant. So, I do human clinical embryology and I do in vitro fertilization and assisted reproductive technology procedures in the more general sense. So those can be everything from egg freezing to genetic testing of embryos to sperm freezing and all the things that we can do in the lab basically to help people overcome infertility or to help them with their family planning. And so my entrepreneurial journey started when my first startup was called 32 ATPs, and ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. That's the unit of energy in your cell. And what we did was we were creating supercapacitors, so basically an electrical device that worked the exact same way that your cells work to create energy. And so essentially we were trying to make something like a green battery, but a battery is really good at giving a low, steady flow of energy. And what we wanted to do was give a big flash of energy. Like if you think about when you used to charge up a flash on top of an old-fashioned camera, that's what a supercapacitor does, is it charges and then it lets off a big burst of energy to, for example, power the flash on an old-fashioned camera. So
wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so we started doing that and creating this supercapacitor with enzymes and sugar. It ran just the same way that your cells work. And then after I wrapped up that project, I actually became pregnant with my own miracle baby.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and I was 37 years old, and I had been in research, and I'd had the startup, and I'd been a little bit in politics, and I had a crazy winding career path. And I decided that I wanted something very stable and very impactful, something that I could really leave my child every day for and feel very, very good about. So I went into human clinical embryology and clinical medical practice. And then as I was going through my training, I started to notice different areas that really could benefit from becoming digitalized. And since I am an entrepreneur at heart, I can never seem to put this away fully. So I see that there was a problem. I can think of a solution, and ART Compass was born out of that. So I really took my ideas and probably about 10 or 15 of my closest friends in the field of assisted reproduction. And so I've been lucky enough to spearhead the project that is ART Compass, but it contains the ideas of many, many people and the help of a lot of people. And it really did come out of this sort of progression through my training as an embryologist and my just my knowledge of how to build software products and my desire to just see a problem and then create something to help fill the need of that problem.
Wow, that's incredible. So let's jump right into it, as we're in the middle of a global pandemic and so many aspects of our lives have been altered forever. So how is COVID-19 impacted on patients coming to you for IVF? And has there been any further developments on understanding the risks and dangers around having IVF during this time, or, just even, in
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, in this time?
Yeah. So right when the pandemic first hit, in general, the recommendation came down from our professional society here in the US, which is called the Association of Reproductive Medicine. And they basically said that IVF cycles were, in general, an elective procedure. And so they needed to be put on pause for a little bit.
Yes.
But the cases that could go forward were the most urgent cases. So, for example, if you're starting chemotherapy and that was going to destroy your eggs, we would be able to go in and do a retrieval on those patients. Or if they were in the middle of their cycle when the pandemic hit, or if there was another argument that made it so that, either the distress or the diagnosis of the patient, the risks would outweigh the benefits of waiting. So for the majority of patients, there would be no risk to waiting 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay.
And so in general, all of those surgeries got put off. For patients who were in the middle of their surgery, their cycles, we were able to continue. And then we were always able to see patients that are what we consider emergent. But, recently, as the pandemic went on, we were able to review all of the protocols in lab, learn more about the virus, what sorts of bodily fluid it was in. Is it present in semen? Are active viral particles present in the fluid that we take from your follicle when we retrieve the eggs? Is it present in blood? Yeah, all of those questions. And also, at the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't have good testing. We do have good testing now. So we've been able to start, as a field, moving forward again and kind of designing our patient experiences in the waiting room so that the patients are spaced out 6 feet and so appropriate social distancing can be maintained.
Yes.
And we're limiting family or partners coming in to be by the bedside of the patients. We're limiting contact with everybody as much as possible, spacing appointments out, and as we've learned more and gotten better testing, we've been able to essentially modify what we were doing previously. But there's a lot of it that we haven't modified because, in the lab, we're always very safe with all of the bodily fluids. We treat all bodily fluids as if they are infected.
Yes.
Even though we do testing for all the infectious diseases on people before they come in to have their surgeries, we still always treat body fluid like it's infectious. And so really it was just about sort of, learning more and getting the protocols in place, and also just looking at the conditions in your area. And are you at a private clinic that is not going to impact a hospital, for example?
Yes,
It can be hard when your IVF clinic is in a hospital setting and you're using resources that the hospital could potentially use to treat patients. But there are so many IVF clinics that that is not the case for. So yeah, in general, we're starting cycles back up again normally, but modified with consideration for COVID.
Oh, well, that's good news for patients, because obviously in the beginning it was kind of scary for everybody.
Absolutely. And there's a very particular sort of desperation when you are trying to have a family. Every single day is a day too long that you've had to wait. So
Yes.
6 to 8 weeks, even though it was necessary, our patients were really emotionally impacted by it and devastated to have to be waiting more. And
Yes.
IVF is like a roller coaster anyway. It's a lot of ups and downs, and it's, undergoing IVF in the middle of a global pandemic is just not something we ever wanted our patients to have to face.
No. Well, I think as well, it probably impacts people psychologically and emotionally, which obviously is going to impact them physically, I suppose, as well.
Yep, that's true. Chronic stress can increase cortisol levels, and increased cortisol levels are very bad for IVF cycles and reproduction. So we do want everybody to try to be as healthy as possible,
Yes.
and that was part of the part of the motivation for waiting a little bit, to make sure, we can't get our patients pregnant if they're not healthy. So
Wow. So as we're moving in such a fast-paced world in terms of technology and development, and I believe that COVID-19 has or will accelerate this now more than ever with the use of technology in solving problems. What made you decide to create an app for IVF practice management, and how do you ultimately see, or what do you ultimately see happening in the world of medicine and technology?
yeah, well, the telehealth, digital medicine has exploded due to everybody being stuck at home because of the pandemic.
Yes.
But in general, medicine should be evolving, and we should be developing these technologies to reach more people where they are. There are so many people, and of course it's different country to country, but especially
Yes.
here in the US, there are so many people without access to healthcare and without direct access to providers. And so many people who live in rural settings where they don't have local physicians and local general practitioners. So I think in general, the pandemic has maybe accelerated the use of some of these technologies and really helping hospitals and doctors to reach patients where they are. And in general, I think that's a good thing. I
Yes.
had a friend, who had needed to get a prescription for something, a common everyday ailment that affects, hundreds of thousands of women. Usually that's a trip to the doctor's office, a long time of waiting probably to see the doctor, then
Yes.
going to the pharmacy, waiting for the doctor's office to call in the prescription, going to the pharmacy. So it's just an hours and hours ordeal to get a simple prescription for an everyday ailment. During the
Yes.
pandemic, she was able to telecommute into the doctor's office, and it was easy like that. 1, 2, 3, she had that prescription. So it's a positive thing that's come out of one positive thing that's come out of the pandemic. And
Yeah.
certainly with respect to the app, we had a tremendous interest from people in the field. So believe it or not, a lot of IVF practices still use paper charts. And
Wow.
that was part of the impetus for us to create this app for IVF practice management. So it really is a laboratory information management system. We do
Yes.
a lot of quality control pieces, but we also track all of the patient's data. And that helps the doctor and the patient communicate much more smoothly, as well as with the rest of the practice. And I think, every patient has had the experience where they've talked to somebody on the phone who knows one thing, their doctor's office, which knows a different thing, somebody at the front desk who knows something else, and nobody seems to be on the same page with respect to their treatment.
Yeah.
And so that's really the problem that we're solving at the heart of our product is, how do you manage information to put everybody on the same page at the same time, especially with an IVF cycle, because there are so many different types of data that need to be integrated into a single platform. So you
Yes.
have the patient testing, which is coming from a medical diagnostic laboratory. You have the information that's generated in the IVF cycle in the lab itself. You have their appointments. You have, the genetic testing of the embryos that comes from yet another different company. So all of these streams of data need to be integrated somewhere. And we provide a single dashboard and a mobile app to do just that.
That's incredible. So are you planning on expanding, or expanding the app internationally as well as nationally, or what's your vision, what's your ultimate vision for the app?
Yeah, so the app is available everywhere. you know, we are just downloadable from the App Store. Your IVF clinic has to be using the app. So the patients and providers can't just download the app and start talking to each other, but it needs to be set up through the IVF lab itself. And really all of the information that gets generated, that's coming from the heart of the IVF practice, which is the IVF lab. And during the pandemic, we did have two of the very large chains in the UK come on board to our app for competency assessment of staff. So we were really glad to welcome them. And we have a lot of sites through Southeast Asia, Malaysia, India. So yeah, we're available worldwide. And it just takes a little bit to set up on it.
Oh, that's amazing. So what have been some of your biggest career highlights?
So one of my biggest career highlights ever was meeting one of my science heroes, Neil deGrasse Tyson. He is one of the only Black cosmologists, astrophysicists, and you know, he's obviously had an amazing career in show business, and with his remake of Carl Sagan's television series, and he's the director of the Hayden Planetarium in New York City. Very smart guy, you know, does a lot of science communication with the public through his Twitter account, and just a hero of mine. And I got to spend half the day with him one day. So that was definitely one of the highlights of my scientific career. Another one was I got to meet the scientist J. Craig Venter, who sequenced the first human genome ever. In fact, it was his own genome. And another one of my career highlights was actually debating genetic engineering of humans at Oxford University. So there I got to debate with one of the discoverers of the CRISPR-Cas9 system. And the CRISPR-Cas9 system is, you know, has taken the genetic engineering world by storm as being the quickest, most efficient, easiest way to genetically engineer any organism. So that was, you know, just being in such a storied place and seeing, you know, Einstein's pictures on the wall of the debate hall, and being there debating with all of the people, and really helping, you know, the next generation of policymakers in the UK have a deeper, more contextual understanding of what genetic engineering is and how it could be helpful and what are the key ethical issues around it was definitely, you know, the highest points of my career. But other than that, I mean, my everyday life now is making miracles. So whenever I get to make embryo, it's just the best day of my life. And so that happens to me every day now. So
yes. And also the fact that you're bringing joy to other people, and, you know, an opportunity for them to have a family, which is obviously in, you know, many of these people's cases a big dream. So I think it's amazing. So as technology is wonderful in so many ways, the world of medicine, there is a lot of talk around telemedicine, which I know we touched on earlier. But as IVF, it's such a personal and complex process. How do you, as doctors and specialists in your field, see the future of telemedicine and the advancement of technology in general changing, and yet still striking a balance of personal patient care face to face and marrying that with technology?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, not only that, but IVF has, we do a lot of what we call third-party reproduction. So there's the use of anonymous egg donors, tissue donors, sperm donors, embryo donation. There's, you know, use of surrogates, and there's sensitive information about people's HIV status and their other sexually transmitted disease status, and sensitive information about their sexual preferences and their partners, and, you know, just all this field is just fraught with what we call PHI, personal health information.
Yes.
that has to be treated with the utmost care. And one of the benefits of telehealth is that it does allow people in countries where some of these techniques and technologies are inaccessible to
Yes.
access providers, for example, in the US, where they can be an LGBTQ couple and find a surrogate, find an egg donor. They never leave their country except when they come to here to pick up the baby, which has been born by surrogacy. And so those are amazing, advances in what telemedicine can do for our field.
Yes.
But there are issues of privacy, security of data, and always with the kind of in the back of your mind that the technology is never going to replace the doctors or the experience with the patients entirely. It
Yes.
can't. So the also with the rise of artificial intelligence systems to help assist doctors in decision making, that's happening everywhere all across medicine, and it's happening in our field as well. And but these technologies will never be able to replace that doctor-patient interaction. They're just a tool for assistance, I guess is how I look at it. And that can be, both a good thing or a bad thing. I think right now the benefits have vastly outweighed the potential for misuse or abuse, or the potential for, like I said, for there to be a security breach or anything like that.
Yes, of course. So what would you say some of your biggest career lessons have been?
Well, so, one of my biggest career lessons, I would say, is that just because something is a good idea doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be successful. So, like we were talking about the biological supercapacitor, and obviously that's a great idea in and of itself, and we need green energy technologies.
Yes.
But that won't be enough to make it successful. So that product we did a crowdfunding campaign. We raised a small amount of money. We created a prototype. We did an academic publication, and we also had a patent granted. But we were not able to raise seed funding for commercialization for that project. And so that was a huge lesson for me. I think another lesson I've had to learn is that, not everybody is happy for you all the time and all of the things that you're doing. And I think sometimes when you have a lot of interests, and you do a lot of things, you really have to balance that with like people's perception of you as and also it's very important, I think, to both find a mentor for yourself.
Yes.
And people talk about having a board of advisors for their company, and just that same way you can almost have like a personal board of advisors for you and consider yourself to be a company. And you want to kind of have advisors that have different strengths that you can pull on. You also want to pay mentorship forward to help bring the next generation, and you want to really try to just help have kind of a 360 ecosystem of mentorship where you're giving stuff back to your mentors, you're getting shit, you're mentoring others, and they're also feeding your spirit through their successes and their career path.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see you did your PhD in animal cloning, and your fellowship was focused on human embryonic stem cell research. So I know there's a lot of controversy around this. So can you please share with us more about this and help demystify this for people who do not understand this fully?
Sure. So we can start with cloning. Cloning is a technology that allows you to exactly reproduce the genetic code of an organism in a brand new organism. Now, I say exactly, but that's not quite the case, because you are taking the nuclear DNA from a cell and you're putting it into an egg, and the egg has mitochondria in it. The mitochondria have their own DNA. So that's one piece of it that you will never be able to replicate from the person that, or the animal. I shouldn't say because we don't clone people, but the animal that you took the cell from.
Yeah.
Another thing is there's a whole field of epigenetics. So your genome, as you are growing in utero, or as an animal is growing in the uterus, is being constantly modified by the through these epigenetic pathways. And so at its heart, cloning is making an exact genetic copy in theory, but in practice, it's technically a little bit different from that. But the reason why people would do that is because in normal reproduction, when you are mating to, let's say, animals together, I studied cattle, so we can use cows as an example. So you're crossing two cows together, a male and female, and the female has been bred to have good milk characteristics. You want dairy cattle that are giving a lot of milk, and the milk is good quality milk with good high fat content and nutritious milk. And so the cows have been bred that way over generations. And when you cross that dairy cow with a bull, you are going to dilute the genome of that animal by half, because you're bringing in the mate. So if you think of what cloning could potentially be good for, it could be good to create a lot of animals from a superior milker that have the exact same genetics. And that way we can start to improve herd quality much faster. We can make more efficient use of the land. We can, which is so important as we look to address global warming and challenges of global warming and feeding the billions and billions of people on the planet. And it's interesting because the cloning technologies gave us this whole spectrum of human embryonic stem cell technologies. There are so many processes that we could never see before because they all happened inside the earliest phases of embryo development, almost before you even know that an animal is pregnant, and certainly before you know that a human is pregnant. So all of those different pathways of how do blank cells become organs, and where does that go wrong? How does that cause disease? How does that cause disease that you're born with, both disease that you're born with and disease that you acquire over your lifetime? So the study of embryonic stem cell technologies and cell lines, and how to push those from being a blank slate into becoming a specific cell type, like a heart cell, will start to address the damage caused by heart attacks, or nerve cells to address all of the different diseases that impact neurons, like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, spinal cord injuries, all of those cell-based therapies that we can think that, that are coming to fruition now, really, because of the different investments that governments made about 15 or 20 years ago into stem cell technologies. So I know they do sound a little scary, and it does depend on what your view is of conception and when life begins.
Yes,
and
of course.
Unfortunately,
and it's a moving target, right?
Yes, it's a moving target. And I unfortunately, in science and medicine, we need to do surgeries on living human beings, and we have to have, animal models to practice on. You can't, as many substitutes as we try to do, there's nothing that can substitute for real live human tissues and cells. So at some point, the models have to move from being like an animal embryo to being a human embryo. And this is why I say we've cured cancer millions of times in mice, but in humans, that number it's a very small number of drugs that ended up being good targets for human cancers. So at some point, it doesn't matter how good the animal models are, but we have to do things with human cells. So we try to do it as ethically and judiciously as possible, sparing, as many material cell lines and using the high ethic to derive these as possible. And so it's kind of interesting now the field I'm in, because in the service of getting women pregnant, we destroy thousands and thousands of embryos. Yes. And there are millions and millions of embryos that are frozen forever in liquid nitrogen that are just sitting in cold storage for many, many years, because a lot of times people will come in to create embryos and they create 10 embryos. They do 2 transfers, but they have 8 embryos that are left frozen. And when people think about the ethics of embryo discarding human embryos, if it was in the service of getting somebody pregnant and it was considered in that way, then usually people have a very different view of the ethics of those human embryos, those 100 cells in a microscopic ball that are invisible to the naked eye. You have to use a microscope to see that. And it is kind of interesting. Like it sort of depends on what the application is of using those embryos or those materials, where people's moral compass points to and where it lies. So certainly I don't think anybody would tell a woman that she, can only create 1 embryo at a time.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
So you've had such a diverse career. So with a PhD and the founder of a number of startups, which is impressive. Where did the entrepreneurial side of you come from? As most doctors in the medical field are not really focused on the business or entrepreneurial aspect. So where and how did this come about for you?
Gosh, that's so hard to answer, because I almost think if it's inside you, it's inside you.
Yeah, for sure.
And yeah, and it's it's definitely the hardest thing that I've ever done, other than raising my child. But in a way, it is like, so you really have to have a lot of for your product to be able to work all day and then come home and work for another 8 hours on trying to run a company on the side. And actually, it's why I don't have a co-founder for my project right now, because I really need somebody else who is going to be that dedicated. And it's very hard to find someone who has that level of dedication. So that was probably also another lesson learned from my first project, is particularly when people have full-time jobs and they're trying to work on the startup on the side. Oftentimes, the initial enthusiasm for starting something up wanes as it gets into the weeds. And that's exactly where I'm at with Art Compass right now. We've really started to, as we've grown, we've really started to need a lot more marketing support, social media and account management and sales, all of those things. And right now I'm still running the company myself. And so yeah, we're at this very interesting phase of the startup journey where we've just launched and we're growing, and we need to find the right people to join our team.
Yeah, and that's always a challenge, because like you say, it comes back down to dedication, and if they have to be at the same level or bring a seriously good skill set. So that leads me to the last two questions. So what are the three key pieces of advice that you would give to those looking to pursue a career in this field? And what advice would you give just to entrepreneurs in general? And what legacy would you like to leave?
As entrepreneurs in general, I think the biggest thing is everybody is going to tell you no. You have to have a really, really thick skin, because people are going to tell you your idea is bad. If that is the case, you've got to go out and convince yourself by talking to your customers that your idea is good. Yes. And you've got to know it with yourself, because you're going to have all sorts of detractors, so many people telling you no. So if you know your idea is good and you've convinced yourself of that by talking to your customer potential users, then that will give you the fortitude to carry on despite the hundreds of no's that you'll hear. And as far as my legacy, I think what I really want to do, and I've done a lot of work in this space, is a lot of mentorship with girls and minorities into the field of. So we need, more people voices. We are missing significant portions of female and minority. And the science that gets done and the discoveries that get made are not necessarily in the problems that we have or that we could bring from our communities. There are a lot of still maternal fetal health rates. There are some that affect communities of color as far as diabetes and heart disease and very specific problems. And what I really would like to do is have, to leave a legacy of helping to pull those voices into the scientific fields and have them grow up, become scientists and doctors, and start addressing those problems, the problems that really impact us.
Yeah, well, that's amazing, Carol. I think what you're doing is, is awesome. And I think the fact that you've also brought your entrepreneurial talent into the world of medicine is phenomenal. So where can people reach you if they want to connect? And yeah, if you could just let people know where they can reach you if they want to connect with you.
So I'm all over social media. Our Twitter and Facebook account. Our Instagram account is ArcCompassIVF. My email address is techteam@arccompass.io. Our web is arccompass.io. And our contact form is up on the website. But also, I'm just Dr. Carol Lynn Curchoe. Curchoe is CURCHOE. And you can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm available everywhere. And other than that, just the techteam@arccompass.io email.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully we can have you back in the future to see where you are and what developments have taken place. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, and everybody stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.